The proletariat is diverse and split amid many different sectors, each with its own experiences and differing qualities of life under capitalism. Identity aspects such as race, gender identity, sexual orientation, place of birth, legal status, religion, ability, education or skill level, and many other categories become different identity aspects we can analyze from a Marxist perspective. The investigation and synthesis of various identity aspects into a unified theoretical framework of the class struggle is known as Proletarian Intersectionality. To paint the entirety of the proletariat as a monolithic entity is to ignore the intersectional nuances present in the material reality of the class struggle. It is a form of idealism called class essentialism. On the other hand, looking at class as just another identity is a form of liberalism. Maoists understand the primacy of class over all other identity aspects. Proletarian intersectionalism does not reject this primacy, nor does it reduce class to just another aspect of identity, but seeks to understand the nature of identity within the overall framework of the class struggle. To obfuscate the class struggle and attempt to silence revolutionary thought or denounce revolutionary theory because it was produced by privileged identities is a form of liberalism. The various intersectional identity struggles should be understood to be different fronts or different battlefields within the overarching class war. To attempt to remove and replace the primacy of the class war with one of the various identity struggles obscures the entire theoretical framework of revolutionary science. Dialectical and historical materialism are intrinsically tied to an analysis of production. By examining production, we can derive an analysis of emergent classes throughout the trajectory of human history. Revolutionary science has explanatory power. It has predictive power. And the entire reason why Maoism is a science at all is due to both the explanatory and predictive strength of our theoretical framework. To attempt to shift focus away from the class struggle is to shift focus away from dialectical materialism and into idealism. It lacks both explanatory and predictive power. Likewise, to attempt to reduce the class struggle down to a simplistic narrative by removing the nuances of proletarian intersectionality is to limit the scope of revolutionary theory and hinder its ability to explain and predict the unfolding of the class struggle. Because of this, liberal intersectionality and class essentialism are two sides of the same idealist coin, which seeks to obscure our theory, and both tendencies, therefore, must be combated. We need to specify the sort of intersectionality that we uphold as Maoists is of a proletarian intersectionality. This is contrasted with identity opportunism seen within liberal and conservative circles, which strives to distract or diminish the primacy of the class struggle in society. Liberal identity opportunism seeks to silence revolutionary voices if they are of a privileged identity. This could be white people or people of a settler background, people who identify as male or cisgendered. It says those among these privileged identities are incapable of, even slightly, understanding the various identity struggles faced within oppressed communities, and are inherently reactionary, even if these individuals condemn their privilege, try to understand the struggles of oppressed identities, and seek to fight against reaction alongside them. It promotes or condemns on the basis of identity, regardless of whether the line promoted or condemned is revolutionary. In this manner, oppressed identity becomes a tool by which the liberal bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie uses to suppress revolutionary lines. Proletarian intersectionalism recognizes the existence of privileged and oppressed identities and seeks resolution to this non-antagonistic contradiction while examining their origins within the context of the class struggle. Doing so enables the issues of identity to be explored on a deeper level through dialectical materialist analysis, and provides a grounded analytic which other forms of non-Marxist identity politics cannot hope to reach because they are steeped in idealism and metaphysics. The working class of all races, sexualities, gender identities, ethnicities, abilities, and other identity aspects can and should coexist together, be tolerant of one another, and respect one another as fellow human beings. But, to the liberal identity opportunist, class is reduced to just another identity rather than placed in its proper context of dialectical historical materialism. The conservative identity opportunist does the same, trying to adopt white or settler populism, a reactionary populism manifesting in a tailism of the reactionary masses. It seeks to define all failure within bourgeois society as a consequence of multiculturalism and a lack of homogeneity. This often descends into fascistic rhetoric and bleeds into petty bourgeois romanticization of laissez-faire capitalism, such as the libertarian ideology. More will be discussed about libertarian and fascist ideology in a future episode, but the important lesson here is that conservatives weaponize the same identity politics they hypocritically claim to oppose. Conservative identity opportunism leads directly to fascism, while liberal identity opportunism leads to counter-revolution and an idealism which will either not contain a true solution to the problem or will descend into reformism, such as the belief that if we just had more black CEOs or a female president or LGBT people in the military, the issues of racism and patriarchy would be solved. Either way, the oppressive forces of bourgeois society are strengthened, and therefore liberals, even if they're not conscious of this fact or have good intentions, become guilty of strengthening the very oppression they claim to resist. Right-opportunist Marxists will ignore identity politics and diminish it as a non-important culture war rather than recognize its rightful place within the class war. They will disregard the struggles of oppressed identities and falsely equate all identity politics to liberalism. This is emblematic of the privilege that some right-opportunist Marxists possess. They may also ignore the issues due to the divisive and controversial nature of identity politics without recognizing that the reason it's controversial is because Marxists have failed to develop and advance a revolutionary line to solve these issues and provide coherence among the mire of liberal posturing. It is an area which is sadly ignored by the Marxism of the imperial core and of settler colonial projects, and has been for far too long. Political territory where Marxists refuse to tread will undoubtedly become occupied by metaphysics and idealism, eventually being co-opted by the bourgeoisie to strengthen their interests. This is why Marxists should not ignore identity politics. To ignore these issues is to cede vital ground in the class struggle. Nested in this cowardice are all of the issues of national chauvinism we have previously discussed. A reluctance to divorce oneself from the reactionary thought of the backward masses, who, despite being proletarian, adopt a fundamentally bourgeois and petty bourgeois ideology. So how should Maoists approach the reactionary working masses? We must attempt to be patient with them and educate them into socialism, that is, proletarian consciousness. This would mean undoing all of the reactionary programming they have been inundated with since birth that permeates throughout our society, not playing into it. We must be bold in our denouncement of reactionary thought and our promotion of proletarian intersectionality. The key is not to alienate them by using language they can't understand and words they are immediately hostile towards. This must be balanced with the truth of our message. We must not compromise the integrity of our message in our approach. This is admittedly a difficult task, but a necessary one if we're to attempt to win over the reactionary masses. Some have taken this to mean that communists should cloak themselves in patriotism, the American flag, the Bible, and use reactionary rhetoric against all things perceived as woke, just as the reactionary bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie do. We might as well adopt the rhetoric of the far right and become double agents for the fascist movement, but how many of these supposed double agents are actually double agents? And how many of them are merely fascists in disguise? When we become unable to distinguish them, we begin to realize the fatal error in this approach. Communists must reject this reactionary populism and conservative identity politics masquerading in its current form of anti-wokeness. The communist movement is anti-white supremacy, anti-religious, and anti-fascist, just as it is anti-liberal, anti-bourgeois, and anti-patriarchal. If these facts are scary to the backward masses, find a way to make them less scary. Just as we discussed in the previous episode, removing the concept of whiteness from society doesn't entail a white genocide, as the alarmists would assume. Neither would removing the concept of institutionalized religion, systemic discrimination, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and the abolition of the patriarchy result in a genocide of a similar nature. Reaching the reactionary masses of the working class entails breaking through the fear these ideas promote among them, while not compromising the integrity of our movement. The goal of proletarian intersectionality is to get rid of the superficiality and shallow analytic of bourgeois intersectionality, bourgeois identity politics, and create a dialogue which solidifies the working class along class lines, rather than the artificial divisions created between us by bourgeois society. Until we can do this, identity politics, aka wokeness, becomes the territory of liberals and plays into the hands of the anti-woke reactionaries by creating fear based on a lack of coherency among liberal conceptions of intersectionality. As for the reactionaries who are stubborn and refuse to change their views, they become counter-revolutionaries and are the enemies of the revolution, just as any who seek to impede the socialist revolution. They must be struggled against, not catered to. However, we must exhaust every option to try to win them over in a principled way. But we must also understand that many are simply too far gone. They will side with the fascists, and therefore they will become our enemy. Those who continue to reject proletarian intersectionality despite our every effort, and to continue to embrace bourgeois identity politics, also embrace a form of counter-revolution. They are also to be considered our enemy. In other words, the hopeless Biden-supporting sycophants with their false wokeness and the hopeless MAGA movement with their fascism are both enemies of the revolution and must be opposed if they cannot see the light. Those communists who tail either side are embracing revisionism and, in doing so, impede the revolution as well. We must draw these lines of demarcation and understand the potential of the different segments of the working class and the errors of our contemporary movement in order to rectify them and advance the class struggle to the point of revolution. So that about does it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Just to review, we talked about the concept of proletarian intersectionality, contrasting it with bourgeois identity politics in the form of conservative identity opportunism and liberal identity opportunism. We also talked about right-opportunism within the Marxist movement and how it obscures and caters to the reactionary populism of conservative identity opportunism. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will catch you on the next episode where we will be talking about common charges against Maoism. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.